Hey there, folks. So, welcome to what I'm going to call episode 0 of the reboot of my survival game series that I've been working on. Episode 0 is going to be initial project setup. So, with that, first thing we're going to do here is our starting template. When you launch Unreal Engine, you're going to have a bunch of options here, but we want the games section. Now, with the previous attempt, I had been drifting towards a focus of first person. However, I understand not everyone wants first person. Some people get motion sickness, things like that. I do want to offer the ability to have third person with my game. So I am going to start with a third person template. As always, obviously, we're going to want to use C++. Now, one of the things you're going to notice, first and foremost, is under blueprints, you have the options for all the various different variants. With C++, you don't. It just gives you all of them. Now, the other thing you do with your project is you obviously name it. Now, one thing with naming convention is what you name your project, it tends to be, well, it doesn't tend. It is used for a lot of the file naming conventions that are auto-generated by the engine. So, previous series, I used the project name of The Fall. And with that, subsequently, everything had things like The Fall API, The Fall player character. And I ended up going through with a lot of my stuff, changing things to TF player character. So I shortened it. So with that, I am just going to be naming my project TF to start off. Now that means, because if the fall, you can see project file already exists. I still have my previous project there. So I'm just going to name this project TF, selecting third person, C++, target platform, desktop or mobile. I'm going to leave that as desktop. Quality preset, I want that scalable. The reason being, so maximum is high-end features default to enabled. I don't want all of those high-end features. Scalable, some features are disabled by default and you can turn them on based on actual hardware. So I want things to be on the lower end of system requirements to start with. So with that, I'm going to hit create. This is going to start creating the project, and we'll be back once all of this process is done. It can take a few minutes depending on your system. All right, so we now have the project up in front of us here. And with that also, let me just pull it up quick. The project itself has been loaded in my case, Rider. I have moved over to that, and I'm going to continue using that for this one. Now in here, first thing I want to cover is, as I was mentioning when we were creating the project, there is the variance. With C++, you don't get a choice. My mouse is going on me. It automatically comes with all of the code for the variants. We don't need or want any of this. There is a lot of stuff for it. Don't get me wrong. There's like some animation related code, UI stuff. If you want to keep this around for reference, feel free. You don't have to delete any of this or go through what I'm about to do here. But as part of this, I want to do a project cleanup and get this stripped down. Now to start with that, we actually want to do it over here in the engine first and foremost. Let me bring the content browser over here. So as you can see in the root of your content, characters, input, level prototype, third person, and then you have variant combat, platform, and side scrolling. Now these ones contain, if I can open them up, they contain related stuff for those variants. Now we don't want any of that. So what I'm going to do here is, if my mouse is going to work, buttons on my mouse are going, we want to delete all of these. So select all of them in my case, right click delete. Now this doesn't delete any of the code. This is just the editor assets that have been created based on that code. And again, the whole purpose of this is I don't want any of these variants. I want the base third person template. and I want to get rid of the variant. So that's something I'm not a fan of, that we don't get the option when it comes to a C++ project. But I'm also not going to go through, start a blueprint project, convert it to C++. That's a lot of extra effort that's not needed. So hopefully this loads up soon. There's only 59 assets, so this shouldn't take too long. Now, while this loads, this first episode, like I said, is just going to be covering the initial project setup, cleaning up these files. So in here, you can see most of this stuff doesn't have a reference. The stuff here is all just basic things. So we can just force delete all of it. Now this will take a moment for the editor to go through and update. And once this is done, we are done in the editor. This cleans up everything here. The rest of the work is going to be done through Rider. So let's wait for this to go through, because this is going to bring up another window. So yeah, as I was saying, though, the project setup is really just cleaning up this basic template and getting everything sorted out for moving forward with the series. No, it didn't bring up the other window. I thought there was one more that comes up. That might be from a different process. Might have been because I had 3 folders selected. But now that's all gone, we can take a look here in our C++ classes. We open this up quickly. You can see we still have the base, third person, and then the side scroller, the platform, and the combat. So what we can do, though, I'm going to move my content browser back to the normal location. If I can get my mouse to work. So from that, though, we are just going to close out of the editor. And actually, before I start deleting things here, I want to run through and take a look at some of the stuff in here. Side scroll and platforming, I have 0 interest in, because they are for those style of games. But in the combat variant, I want to take a look at a couple things here. So in here, you can see there is some montage bindings. There is, what was the other thing? It's got a health bar already included. We have the new input functionality that or process, I should say, where you've got your binding. So a combat character move. Let's go down to our, where are they in here? I could always just search for the function, but I want to scroll through. So here, so setup player movement, you can see we're binding the move action to a combat character move. And then if we go back up to the top here and we look at a combat character move, we're taking our input, we're adjusting that input, and then we're passing it through to the do move function. Now, if we take a look at the header on this, you can see move action. That's the input. And where are these functions? I haven't looked over these too much. So we have move, which is a protected, and then we have a public do move. The reason being is this is so... Well, my understanding is the do move function is the blueprint interface version of it, because it can be set up for like touch input and that. And then the move, where is it? I am being blind. I was just looking at that. So, and then the move is the C++, where you set it through the input bindings, which is the, scroll all the way down, which is what you do with the enhanced movement component. I personally don't know why they've gone about it this way. because like you're binding a function to another function effectively through the process, but it's how Unreal and Epic have decided to do it. But with that, the first thing I want to do is I want to actually get rid of these three altogether. So I'm going to right click, edit, delete the three folders. Now, once this is done, what I normally do, and this is personal preference, open an Explorer, bring this over. When my mouse works again, let me just actually, so I want to adjust my file pane there because I don't want everything being given away. In your project, source, the fall, and you can see all of that is gone. And that was my mouse sucks. Undo that. Yeah, I'll deal with that after. You can see all of that's gone. And that's important. That cleans up all of that additional code that we don't need. So from that, we are going to run a build. Now I'm going to not talk through this whole process because it's going to take a while. But in here you can see now a bunch of, actually I'm going to stop the build because that's exactly what I was looking for. So you can see there's now a bunch. Reference directory does not exist. Well, what that is, it's in our build, sorry. In our build.cs, you can see down here, public include paths. It was including all of the subfolders. We don't need any of those right now. So I'm going to get rid of those. Uncommon if you're using Slate UI, private dependency modules.add range, slate core. Well, instead of uncommenting that, it'll end up getting moved up here because we already have private dependency modules. The reason for this is you're adding, and you can see here, sorry, there's another one where it's been commented out. This is adding to an existing singular. This is adding multiple. And you can do these. Like, we could have multiple public dependency names.add range. This just pushes it in. But anyways, now I'm done prattling on about that. Let's run a build, and I will be back once we are in the editor. All right, so we are back in the editor. Now, for anyone who was wondering, the reason for doing that is I wanted to make sure the editor didn't have anything left in it regarding those variants. We deleted all the blueprint or editor content, but we still had the C++ classes. Now, taking a look at our content browser, you can see that's gone there. If we go back to just our main content, blueprint class, all classes, let's put combat in. You can see that's gone. Side, if I could spell, there's no side scroller. So that, the whole reason for doing that, of the initial editor opening up after we created the project, deleting that content, deleting it through Rider or your IDE of choice, and then rebuilding, is that cleans the editor. Now, a couple of the other things you want to do, and I mentioned this in the previous series introduction, but editor plugins, oh sorry, not editor, edit plugins. The reason for this is by default, that's a new one. Anyways, so the reason by default is there is a lot of stuff that gets enabled that you don't need based on your project type. Like, for example, I don't need any of the paper 2D stuff, so I can disable that. And I'm not going to go through this entire list of plugins. There is a lot. But you can see as you make any modifications, it requires a restart. But what you're going to want to do is go through each and every one of these categories and enable and disable based on your needs. Now, for example, I have zero intent of doing anything for Android. So anything Android related, I'm just going to turn off. But again, I'm not going to sit here and go through all of these. It is going to be based on your project, your target platforms. Like if you're making a mobile game, you're going to want Android support. You're going to want iOS. I don't need any of that. I'm making a single player desktop game. I'm not making a multiplayer game, so I don't need to worry about networking, things like that. So go through this entire list and disable all the plugins you don't need. And ultimately, even if it's something you're not sure, well, maybe I'll need that down the line, disable that as well, because you can always re-enable these. One I will say, where is it? Install all plugins. There is one that you want to make sure you don't. What is it? I can't remember. And they might have actually removed it. There was one content browser. So these content browser ones, don't disable those. It actually, there's a couple, and make sure you read the little comment. There's a couple that disable things. Like I accidentally once disabled a plugin that enabled access to plugins, and it was in a Blueprint project, so I didn't have easy access to fix it. Well, actually, you do. You edit your UProject, but either way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and I will be back once I've gone through and cleared up all of my plugins. All right, so I have gone through and disabled all of the plugins that I personally feel weren't needed. I have not, and I want to clarify this just for anyone who wants to follow along, I have not enabled any plugins. Everything has just been disabled. If and when I need to enable a plugin, I will obviously come in and include that as part of the series. Now, I do realize I didn't explain why. The reason being is plugins are something that is loaded as part of the startup for the editor. Having a bunch of enabled plugins that you don't need, not significantly, but it does impact startup and a few other aspects of the engine, and also final compilation, because the related code needs to be included with that. So the more you can strip down your plugins to the bare minimum, the better performant things are going to be. Now, again, it's not a huge, you're not going to notice a drastic increase. It's not going to be like a 30-second to a 5-second startup process timeline, but it is, with everything else, it does have an impact. And I like to try and, as you've seen with the code and everything, I like to strip out all the unneeded stuff as early as possible. Now, even though it says restart now, we're not going to do that just yet. I'm going to close out of the plugin section. We're going to look at project settings. Now, there's a few other things we want to look at here as well. So I didn't cover any of this in the original series, but I want to cover this now because it is something I have seen even with some games as big as Ark, like Ark Survival Evolved. Project name, third-person template. For anyone who has Ark Survival Evolved, like the first one, start it up and then look at it in Task Manager. It's, I believe, first-person shooter, or they may have fixed it, but it used to be. But anyways, project name. Change this to the name of your game. So in my case, I'm going to call, or change it to The Fall. Project version. Now this is the initial version. I'm going to put this at 0000. I don't want to call it octet, but the number of versioning increments, partitions, portions, whatever you want to call each of those individual zeros that you use is going to be down to your personal preference. My approach to things is The very first one is major release. So like version 1 would be the first full public release. Version 2 would be a major overhaul. So we'd say 1. The second one is a feature. So say, for example, create my basic survival game that I was doing in my last season or series. And then after I get there making all the core features, and it's like, okay, I want to add drivable vehicles. That would be the second one. That's a major feature. I say I want to add that, like I don't. I want to add drivable vehicles. That's something for much further down the series, though. The third one would be, in my opinion, and again, there's a lot of different opinions on these. The third one is for a public patch. So say, for example, we had drivable vehicles added. Well, and then we realized, well, it broke something. We needed to release an update. So that would be that one. And finally, this fourth one is internal version. So this one is how many builds, success builds, or however you want to determine, that have gone through internal testing. So say, for example, you think you're done, you make a release build, you put it out to your QA department. That could be yourself, but you put it out into QA for making sure things are good. You go through all your testing. You find there's a bug. Something breaks. Okay, this is 1. Put that one out. Something else breaks. Need to do a code fix. Okay, that's 2. And that would actually be like this. And then what would happen is you're finally done. You have a successful public release version. You would change it from 1.1.0.2 to 1.1.1.0. Again, this is entirely your personal preference or your team, company, however, your versioning preference. For myself, I do like using all 4. And again, so that's major release, feature release, public patch, internal release. Company name, this is going into additional information that I personally don't need to worry about right now. Company distinguished name, homepage, support contact. Legal, so this is your copyright, licensing terms, privacy policy. Again, I'm not going to go into all of that. Project display title. The project's title, as displayed on the window title bar, can include tokens, game name, platform architecture, build, configure. A bunch of these are things you can use to name. Let me move this out of the way. I don't have it here, but I believe it's the equivalent of how you see that text across the top if you have a title bar. I don't want a title bar, so not really going to be too useful there. And then for debugging as well. Should Windows preserve aspect ratio, borderless window? Yes, that is what is going to be hiding this. Allow window resize? No. Allow close? No. And this gets rid of these. May not see it, but in the top right, your minimize, restore, and your cross. That's what these are for. And having all of these off should, in theory, get rid of the title, and everything should be a full screen. Combination of all of these. I offset for fixed stereo. These ones, again, these are settings you're going to want to tweak based on your project. Now, there is a lot of other settings in here. I'm not going to go through all of them with you. Again, that's for you to go through. Some of these, like you can see, there's paper 2D, but I've disabled it. These are engine ones. I'm not sure why, even though it's been disabled. Well, actually, the reason why these are here is because it's been disabled, but we haven't done a restart thinking about it. So don't worry about any of these plugin settings. Platform, again, don't worry about any of these here. A lot of these will get removed with a restart. Editor, these are the various editor-based stuff. Again, not going to go through all of those. My mouse would work. My left mouse button is broken. Or breaking, I should say. So encryption, this is how when you do a public build or a release build, things are done. I'm not going to go through this. We'll deal with that when a build episode comes up. Gameplay tags, these are... I'm not 100% sure, so I'm not going to go into these. Maps and modes, so default game mode, default editor startup. This is the map that when you load the editor that it loads into. Game default map is the first map that is loaded when the game itself launches. So that's like you do a release build and you run that build. Right now, obviously, it's the third person example map. But when we get a little further in the series, this is going to be changed to what I commonly call my persistent or forever. I name it persistent level. And it's just an empty scene that all logic is executed from that point forward. Local multiplayer, I'm going to just disable that because, again, that helps reduce some stuff. Game instance class, we're going to want to change this once we get to that. Movies, wait for movies to complete. And if enabled, the game waits for startup movies to complete even if loading has finished. Movies are skippable. Now, this is if you want like startup video clips and stuff like that. Again, we'll cover this in more detail when I get to that portion of the series, which is going to be a long ways down the line. Packaging, this is with regarding to making a release build. Again, I'll cover this in more detail down the line. Supported platforms. This is a big one because, again, it helps reduce startup times and stuff as well. Select the supported platforms for your project. Attempting to package, run, or cook your project for an unsupported platform will result in a warning. Basically, it's telling you, hey, if you turn something off and you're trying to build for it, it's not going to work. Well, I don't want to support all platforms. I only want to support, right now, Windows and possibly Linux. I don't know. I'm not a Linux fanboy. I use Windows, but I also understand Linux is actually getting a little bigger in popularity. But anyways, and then target hardware. Optimize project settings for scalable. Obviously, I must have missed this, or it defaults to that. But in here, the following changes will be applied when this project is reopened. Restart editor, apply later. These settings are saved in the default ini, which you can modify. Engine rendering, bloom is enabled. Separate translucency is enabled. Motion blur is disabled. I hate motion blur, so I'm happy with that. Auto exposure is disabled. You're going to find there are certain cases where things get really bright or really dark. That's auto exposure. Ambient occlusion, I want that. Lens flare image based is disabled. Anti-aliasing method is none. That one we may want to change. Project map mode, use split screen is enabled. Slate, explicit canvas child Z order is disabled. Well, we're going to leave that there. Into the game setting, asset manager, we're going to leave all of this as is, not changing anything here. Asset tools, the same thing. Slate, RHI render set renderer. I hate that word, renderer. Honestly, I haven't gone too far down Slate, so I'm going to leave this. We may end up exposing or making some changes here. We'll see. Widget state settings, all results have been filtered. There's nothing there. Zen streaming. Honestly, again, I'm not sure what this is all for. So we've covered our project settings. Finally, the last thing I want to do is editor preferences. Now, this one is going to be down to your personal opinion. There is various themes you can choose from. Dark is the only one by default. You can modify, save, things like that. So duplicate the theme and edit it, export, make all the changes you want here. Where was the one I was wanting? There is a particular one and I can't remember what it was. Give me 1 second and I will find it and I will be right back. So this is not the one I was looking for, but while looking, this was one I wanted to mention. In my last series, I did start off with live coding enabled. It ended up causing some headaches and grief in the long term. So I'm not a huge fan of it. So I am going to be disabling live coding. And with that, you just have to uncheck this top one. The rest of it automatically gets disabled. So, where do you? But yes, anyway, so before, oh no, this was it right here. It is loading and saving. So autosave. You may see this, well, not you may see this. If you haven't done anything with it, it does happen quite a lot where you get your autosave pop up. If you miss it, you're in the middle of doing something, triggers an autosave, and it causes quite a delay. So this is personal preference, but it's something I'm doing just in case anyone later on in the series is wondering, oh, why does it not happen? I'm actually going to be disabling autosave. The reason being is whether I'm there is situations where you're in the middle of doing something and an autosave triggers, and it's frustrating. And I personally dislike that because you're sitting there and you're trying to do work, and all of a sudden it's saving and like you missed canceling the autosave. So you can do a couple of things with that, though. You can change the number of seconds. So you can say, oh, a 10-second countdown, 50-second countdown, a minute countdown. In this case, it's like it'll trigger after you've been idle for 15 seconds. You can set that to 2 minutes, 5 minutes, however you want it to be, if you want to use the autosave. There is advanced options here. With that, I take the risk. I understand things like power outages and that can be problematic. For myself, that is not a problem. I have a UPS. So power outage, I have 5 minutes of runtime guaranteed for shutting down my system safely. Now, the other one, and this is going to be, was it here? Developer tools. Oh, I had found it and then forgot about it. Source code. So, source code. This is where you set your IDE of choice. Now, in here, you've got Visual Studio, Rider, 10X, Sea Lion. Use what you prefer. I'm just sticking with Rider because I've actually found I'm starting to like it, and the update to their use or the licensing for their non-commercial version, I can do what I'm doing with this and I'm not in breach of the license, so I can record this entire series using Rider, and should I get to the point where I'm ready to release the game, it is only at that point that I need to worry about paying for a license. So with that, I'm going to be using Rider, but again, use your IDE of choice. Doesn't matter. Use Notepad++ and write code without syntax or IntelliSense or anything like that. It's your choice. Work with it how you want to. And then there's something else. What was that? Oh, where was it? There was one other one. Nope, I can't remember where it is. So with that though, again, feel free, go through all of your settings in here. I do recommend doing this at the start of your projects to go through and change particular settings. Like you want to change some keyboard shortcuts, go right ahead. you want to change your world partitioning logic, go right ahead. Or your variables in this case. Doing that at the start of your project is the safest point because it allows you to make the changes, and if you accidentally break something, you're not going to potentially lose a good chunk of work or break a wide swath of code work, things like that. So, the other thing I wanted to mention, and that was regarding plugins. First and foremost, I'm going to close the editor out here. With plugins, I'm just waiting for Ryder to, there we go. If you open up your UProject file, you can see in here a lot of things have been added. Originally, most of these weren't here. What this is how it says an editor plugin has been disabled if it's a default setting, or in the case of something that it's not deemed as default. For some reason, modeling tools isn't a default one. State tree isn't a default one. Gameplay state tree. These, oh, this mouse is going to kill me. These are how you can control and set it. So if in here, like I mentioned, I accidentally did something, I think it broke the content browser or the plugin manager, one of those two. If you end up doing that, you can edit that through the UProject file and fix things. So a couple ways you could do it. You could just delete that section or just change the Boolean enabled from false to true. And that's going to allow you to enable, disable as you go forward. Now, I'm going to end this episode off here. This is the very basic, as I said, episode 0 project setup. I've covered basically exactly what I wanted to for this one. It's covering everything on getting your, I'm trying to think how to word this, initial starting point set. Now, actually, before I end the episode, there is one other thing I would like to cover. Version control. I'm not going to go into specifics because everyone has their own preference. I've used Perforce, I've used Git, I've used manual zip and backup. Use a version that works for you. Whatever you are most comfortable with using, use that. But I will say, use version control. You will, and I'm going to at some point in this series, you will make such a mess of something at some point, you need to just say, screw it all, and throw away the mess you made. And you don't want to be doing that with a whole project. You want to do that with a day's worth of code work, 2 days worth of code work, that sort of thing. So find out, and well, not find out, figure out the version control methodology you want to use. And quite literally, if you want to just every Friday take a copy of your work, save it to an external drive with a date, do that, but do something. Make sure you're keeping regular backups. But with that, at this point, I am going to be ending this episode off. Between this episode and next, I am going to be setting up my version control. I will, as I mentioned, I will be using Git. I'm just not doing that on camera simply because I'm not exposing my Git information. I keep my repository private for a reason. But as always, folks, thank you for watching. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, or anything about this episode, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Hop over onto the Discord, ask them there. I do still recommend using the Discord simply because I get those notifications better than I do YouTube notifications. Next episode is going to be the first episode in the first module that I want to work on. That is going to be our character module. Now, that isn't going to be the full-blown like AI characters and everything. This is going to be the base work for the player character. That will, as I mentioned, be a module on its own, but that is also in the future going to get expanded into all character types. But as always, folks, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.